So, Aaron, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, first of all, I live out in the middle of the country, so internet is very sparse down here. My name is Aaron. I'm from the show ReEducation. I do a show on skepticism, socialism, anarchism, communism, that sort of thing. And we talk a lot about politics. We talk a lot about how we can reform and basically use revolutionary tactics towards finding a better system or making a better system.
I like it. Sounds good. Um, so you had a interesting beginning in your journey to where you're at now. How did you get here?
Right. So it's a long story. When I was growing up, I'm probably going to say I changed my ideology mostly around 2012, something like that. But up until that point, I was very much a conservative leaning person. I went so far as to say that I was alt-light in a couple of videos, but I would actually, now that I've thought about it a little bit more, I'd even go further and say that I was very much alt-right when I was growing up. And that came about from basically living in a community that was full of a lot of people that had very mixed ideas on how race and gender and class and that sort of thing worked. My parents were, for lack of a better term, really quite racist people. I kind of adopted all of those stereotypes and just kind of fell into the wrong crowd. A lot of the people that I associated with were bona fide neo-Nazis, skinheads, the kind of guys that would go around erecting and burning crosses and that sort of thing. And I've been around a couple of times when they've done that sort of stuff, and it was intense to say the least. But back in those days, I was, a rambunctious kid. I was really interested in a lot of that kind of stuff. I thought that it was edgy. I thought that it was cool. I thought that it was interesting and taboo. So it made me want to join with them and kind of roll with those kinds of people. And yeah, it basically turned into being a very difficult situation for a lot of people. Just to give you an idea of the kind of people that I'm talking about. My one friend, I'm going to not use any names obviously here, but one of the friends that I had actually had an incident where them and a couple of their buddies went around the town finding people that were married, to different colored people, interracial marriages and so forth, and planted shrapnel bombs on the front of their steps, so they would blow up when these people came to their door. Luckily, all of the people that were doing that, these neo-Nazi kids, were about as dumb as bricks, so they weren't able to actually make the shrapnel bombs go off properly. But it is some people did end up getting hurt from it. So these weren't good guys. It was a really bad, yeah, it was a really bad situation, and lots of other things too. Like it was just it was really rough. Like a lot of vandalism, lots of stuff like that. So it was a really rough crowd. And I thought to myself that all of this stuff is just, kind of normal, right? Like this is the normal that I grew up with. This is just the way things were. And it wasn't until I started getting out into the real world, into like the workforce and that sort of thing, and really started to talk to other people, that I realized that everybody is just a human being, right? It's not about somebody being a certain color or somebody having a certain religion or somebody believing a certain thing. It's about us all being people and us all having to work together and live together on this planet. And we're just trying to get by. And I lost a lot of those ideas when I started to progress further into the workforce and talking to more people and moving around a lot and that sort of thing. So.
Wow, yeah. Planting explosives is definitely a step up in the escalation factor there.
Yeah. Yeah. Looking back at that, and then looking at the things that are going on now, like with milkshaking and stuff, I'm just like, yeah, okay, shaking my head a little bit when I'm thinking about it.
Yeah. And then, so you kind of leave this group and you start thinking about things a little bit more in depth. And how did that, like, I mean, that transition, we all
Yeah.
make them, but I mean, that's a big one.
that is a long way to go, isn't it? Right. So, okay. So I guess that's really the beginning of the whole transition through being that way, being very much a racist, borderline Nazi character, to finally becoming what I am today, more of a revolutionary, more of a person that's on the side of we all need to get along and thinking more communistically about things. But getting there was long road, right? And it took a lot of different factors to actually get me to that point. There isn't a lot of people think that there's some magic bullet out there, that there's some sentence that somebody's going to be able to say that's just going to convince everybody around that this is the right way to go about things, this is the right way to do things, and there's not. Right? Everybody is different, and they're all going to come to their positions in a different way. My journey had a lot to do with skepticism, right? I was a big time skeptic all growing up. So one of the things that I noticed through YouTube and that sort of thing is a lot of these people that I used to idolize that were skeptics weren't holding to this same kind of skepticism when it came to other things, when it came to race, when it came to gender, when it came to anything basically other than religion. And I started to notice that because, I'm like you, Bo. I'm one of the kind of guys that'll go out there and I'll actually fact check stuff. And and I'll try. Sorry, we're trying not to swear here. I'll actually go and I'll try to fact check stuff, and I'll try to find out if it's true. So when I hear something that I don't think is necessarily correct, then I'll go and I'll check it out. I'll find out if it is true, and I'll make a decision from there. And I try to be intellectually rigorous, even back then. And if I found an argument that convinced me that was, a good argument, good sound argument, I would want to change my mind. But that's not everyone, man, right? Like a lot of people have all of these ideas made up over the course of an entire lifetime. And that lifetime is really what defines that person as a human being. So when you already have all of these things making you up as that person, and then you have that worldview challenged, right? That's not only going to disrupt the way you think about things. That's going to make you angry. It's going to make you lash out, and a lot of people are very much that way. So luckily, I was already this skeptically minded person. So when I heard alternative arguments to the things that I was saying, I thought that they were rather convincing. My entire journey, back when I was very much right leaning, one of the things that I was arguing for a lot was the fact that one of my friends couldn't wear a T-shirt in school that had a great big swastika on it. Now, I was arguing back then that I think that it's a good thing that he should be able to go and wear this because he should be able to wear things that say white pride or that sort of thing, swastikas, that sort of thing, because not only freedom of speech, but also on top of that, oh, hopefully I didn't lose you. Um, Oh, that's right. So I was fighting for this friend of mine so he could be able to wear this T-shirt with a swastika on it. And one of the arguments that I was always making was that he should be allowed to wear that because people in my high school, they were all Native people. They were all wearing Native Pride T-shirts. So I thought, oh, that's absolutely ridiculous. You can't just be wearing a Native Pride shirt and get away with that and not allow somebody that's white to be wearing a white pride shirt, allowing them to get away with that. But the problem is, though, is that I didn't realize the cultural connotations that came along with this. This is all coming from the broken mental faculties of a young teenage boy who doesn't understand the world, who's looking at everything through the lens of somebody who lives a relatively privileged life. So I don't understand that there's a lot of things that are involved in just not just racism, but the power dynamic between white people and black people, or white people and Native people, and that sort of thing. So um, I remember being back in uh, summer school, fighting for this, and almost getting into a physical confrontation with the teacher, actually trying to fight for this friend of mine to be able to wear these sorts of things. And it wasn't until later on in life that I heard other arguments, like the one I gave you a moment ago, about how there is that power dynamic and there is that serious division between people that is reinforced by state structures and that sort of thing that really makes not just these racist statements hurtful, but it perpetuates a problem throughout the rest of society that continuously pushes down on these certain individuals and makes their lives harder. So even just me as an individual going out and doing that definitely does make things a lot harder for those people. So that is how my journey basically started. And after listening to a lot more skepticism and that sort of thing, I found myself mostly doing this journey online because that's where I live. I'm very much an online person. And I found people like Richard the Dick Coughlin, and he was making really good arguments against people like Stefan Molyneux. And I thought that that was really interesting. I've seen people like Kevin Logan and Christy Winters, who are, if your audience doesn't know who any of these people are, that's fine. They're people who a lot of people would be calling SJWs or social justice warriors. And I thought that a lot of the things that they were saying, though it was aggravating to me and sometimes cringy, um, I thought that they made fairly decent arguments, and it started pushing me towards that leftist side. And there's a lot of things that did that as well. Learning more about social democracy and democratic socialism through the Bernie Sanders campaign, and other YouTubers that covered that sort of thing. Even watching some Young Turks videos, which I would probably never do now. But back in those days, it did help me hear a different opinion and actually get a different idea of how those sides think. Um, and eventually, I started to realize that all of this is basically just a bunch of people that are looking at life through certain lenses, right? When you're born, you're dumped into a box, and everybody is told that they have to stand there and defend and fight for that box. But none of that makes any sense because when you're born, you're just a human being with different kind of stresses, different kinds of pressures, different kinds of everything, and everybody is going to come out of that in a different way. So me thinking that all of these people were bad or not as good as I was or anything like that all throughout high school and that sort of thing, uh, once I started to hear about all of these other arguments about how they had to fight for social equality, all of these things with Martin Luther King and with fighting for civil rights and that sort of thing, that started to put a fire in my belly, right? It started to make me really realize that not only is this social justice thing, though I thought it was cringy at first, not only is it a good thing, it's something that we should all be fighting. So I started to gear a lot of the things that I was saying back in those days towards being more social justice oriented, um, and trying to talk a little bit more about the world through the lens, somebody who actually cares about things, instead of just being cynical and basically saying that everything is terrible. Uh,
So where are you at now? Like where, if you had to label yourself and you choose to, what would it be?
Yeah, okay. So I'm very open with my labels. I'm an anarcho-communist. Anarcho being the abolishment of all unnecessary or unjustified hierarchies, and communist is the worker control and ownership of the means of production. And I chose those labels because I feel that they are the most fitting for the ideals that I've always had, or at least had for a long time.
So you will be able to answer a question that pops up in the comments section all the time. Tell me the difference between communism and socialism and anarcho-communism and all of it. Break it down for us.
Okay, so all right, so perfect. I'll let you know. All right, so communism and socialism are the same yet different, right? When you're in the United States, basically everybody considers them to be the same exact thing. Those two words are interchangeable with one another, but the way that they were initially spoken about was, I'm not going to say initially, but basically the best way to explain it is communism is basically the goal, whereas socialism is a path towards that goal, right? So communism is, for those who don't know, who don't think, or for those of you who have heard about it, you probably think that it's the spooky thing that the Soviets and the Chinese do, and it's terrifying, and you don't want anything to do with it because it's an oppressive regime. Well, originally it wasn't meant to be that. Originally, it was meant to be a stateless, classless, moneyless society where the workers own the means of production. That means that they own all of the factories, all of the goods, and all of the tools that are used to produce goods inside of a system. And they run off of the axiom from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. So that's what communism is, and that's the goal that people want to eventually aspire to. Socialists, for the most part, want an eventual communist society, but to get there, you need a certain pathway, right? And that's where socialism comes in. Now, there's a lot of people that are going to be listening to me right now saying that's not what any of this means. These mean totally different things. Those aren't the right words. That this is the incorrect definitions. You're probably right. There are millions of different definitions for socialism and communism. For every different country that there is, there's a different, for every different socialist country that there is, there's a different version of socialism being instituted there. Just like capitalism, there's a different type of capitalism in every different country. So just like in Dubai, you're going to have a capitalist country that is radically different from the one that you see in the United States. So socialism is the same way. But generally, socialism is the pathway towards getting that stateless, moneyless, classless society. So it's basically looked at as a transitional state. If you're going to put this in economic terms, socialism is the social ownership of the means of production, whereas communism is the worker ownership of the means of production. Social ownership can mean in many different ways. So you can actually have socialist states that are partly socialist, partly capitalist. You can have social programs, which often get confused with socialism itself, which actually lands more on the side of the capitalist side than post-capitalist. So there are a lot of different types of socialism. There are a lot of different isms when it comes to all of this, and it's extremely complicated. So I'm sorry if it is a little bit boring, but but that's
So,
basically what that is.
so what is AOC?
AOC. Okay, so AOC, that's a great question. AOC is something called a social democrat. Now, she'll call herself a democratic socialist, but that's not what she is. She's a social democrat, and that is because she is still technically a capitalist. She says that she wants social programs, social change, that sort of thing. But when she's talking about those things, she's talking about them in a reformist way. She's talking about them in a way where we can take the structure that we have now and tweak it and alter it and change it and do all of these technocratic solutions so we can make it a little bit more palatable to everyday people, which if you ask anybody who's post-capitalist, they'll tell you that's not going to work. It's just like putting a band-aid on a bullet hole. It's just not going to help you at all. But that's basically what AOC is. And that's the same thing with Bernie Sanders as well. Bernie Sanders is also a social democrat.
All right. So if you're an ANCOM, an anarcho-communist, um, how's that different from the original version of communism, or is it?
It's not, right? So as far as I'm concerned, we're more pure about things, right? We like to think of things as more or less like we believe in the original unfettered version, uncorrupted version of communism, and that involves the structure of power as well, right? So when you're talking about communism and when you're talking about anarchism, you're talking about two different but connected things. Communism is talking specifically about the economy and how the economy works, whereas anarchism is talking about power structures, right? So communism, that's how you deal with your goods, and anarchism is basically the abolition of all unjustified or unnecessary hierarchies. It doesn't mean getting rid of all hierarchies. That just means finding all of the ones that are good and making sure that we keep those and eliminating all of the bad ones.
Right, right. So you are a real leftist, like by the real term.
Well, I hope so. And but you know what? Here's the thing, though, is that is technically yes, technically I'm a leftist, but the way that I like to look at things is that it isn't necessarily about left or right. It's about working people against the system that is corrupted and pushing down on all of us, right? I don't like to sow any kind of division. I don't like to say conservatives are wrong because they're conservatives. I like to say conservatives are wrong because they're fed the same kind of propaganda that everybody else is. They're just wrong in a different way, right?
Mhm.
I think that liberals are wrong too. They're just wrong in a different way. We need to be more welcoming and come together as a people, come together as all working people, and fight for the rights of everybody rather than just allowing this system to continuously push down on you.
So, if you had one solution to offer that would help solve most, or at least, a good portion of society's problems, it would be workers of the world unite. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I would definitely say that would be useful. But a practical solution would
Mhm,
be using something called worker-owned co-ops, right?
mhm.
Now, this is a more reformist solution, but I definitely like to push this idea because it's really smart. A worker-owned co-op is basically a company that instead of having one owner, right, the capitalist that goes in and buys the business and hires a bunch of workers, you have a group of people that get together and work together to own and control that business themselves. So that allows them to decide what they'll produce, when they'll produce, how they'll produce it, and what they're going to do with the profit, which is fantastic because if that's the case, you don't have one CEO 100 miles away collecting all of your money, all of the surplus labor value, the money on top of all of the money that you've made that covers your labor cost and the cost that takes to run the business. They're taking, instead of them taking all of that money and putting it in their pocket, in a worker co-op, that money is spread out through all of the workers. So you actually make more and you get that added bonus of feeling like you own something. And I think that, as far as I'm concerned, is the number one solution that all post-capitalists should be pushing towards right now, as far as reformist ideas go.
Yeah, and we're actually starting to see a lot of those pop up, even here, like in the boonies. Um, so I've got to ask, because I know it's going to show up in the comments section. In this worker-owned co-op, isn't there going to be a boss?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it depends on how you want to set it up. So
Hmm.
if you are a group of people, say you're just a couple of people that are making shoes or jewelry or whatever it is, a commodity, and you all know basically what you need to do, and there's only three or four of you, and you can basically work together, then no, you don't really need a boss. But that's where this whole justified hierarchy system comes in. If you find out that there is the necessity of having somebody there to organize, somebody there to delegate, somebody there to point people in a direction and say, this is what you need to do, this is how you need to do it, and this is where it needs to go, that's when you get somebody that would be a boss. But instead of just having that person appointed by the owner or whatever it is, these people can be democratically elected into positions of authority. It's called democracy in the workplace.
Hmm.
And it allows all of the workers to have democracy, not just in their daily lives, in their everyday space, voting on whatever it is, your mayor or your president or whatever. You now get to vote on your management, on your bosses, on your supervisors, on all of those sorts of people. That way, if they make a mistake, they are 100% not only responsible for it to you, they're responsible to the owners and to all of the employees as well. So it's a much better system. It's a much more democratic system. And at the end of the day, they still have to wash their dishes in the sink just like everybody else does.
I like it. So give me a topic of the day that you haven't done a YouTube video on that you want to, and expound. Give us some new content.
Oh boy, right off the top of my head.
Yeah,
It
go
takes
for
me
it.
hours every morning to think about what I'm going to talk about. You know, so I've been really wanting to do a video about the protests that have been going on in China. But my problem with doing a video about, and I've been kicking around the ideas in my head a lot, but the problem with doing a video about that is there is so much propaganda on all sides that I just can't make heads or tails of it. And I'm not like you, where I'm it's steeped in all of this international politics and just knowing how all that stuff works. Like when I want to go research something about a country, I have to sit there for hours learning everything about that country because I've never looked it up before because our education system is broken,
Mm.
right? And we don't learn about these sorts of countries. We don't learn about their systems. So if I wanted to do a video on it, I'd have to do a whole bunch of this extra research. The problem with China is that the United States wants to make China look bad. They want to make sure that all of the narrative that is pushed in the media makes sure that the government, the communist government, is looking terrible, while all of these protesters are looking like heroes and that sort of thing. Not saying that they aren't. I think that anybody fighting against a repressive regime is absolutely fantastic. But there's no way for me to just know what the real story is there, because we're just fed all of this propaganda, so much propaganda all of the time, that I don't even really know heads or tails where to start on that.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, there are contractors who are looking at that and going, man, because there are a lot of telltale signs that looks like there's a lot of, let's just say, outside influence in some of the protests. And nobody wants to come forward and be like, yeah, do that, and then find out that a large portion of it was pushed by a U.S. agency, when most of the guys I know and still talk to have kind of decided not to work for the government anymore. And they don't want to cross that line again. um,
Yeah.
but there's definitely, from the area experts, the people that we know that really are into China, there's definitely a huge organic component to it. So, I feel kind of bad, because I'm like, this seems real. This seems real on every level. You have a whole bunch of real complaints, real people out there in the street, but because we're seeing the fingerprints of outside manipulation, everybody's kind of holding back. And, you don't want to go full bore into supporting it. And in a way, I feel bad, because I'm like, this is something, the organic protest should definitely be supported, but how do you separate it from what's being manipulated? It's difficult. It is. That's a tough one. I haven't done a video on it yet.
Yeah, exactly. Not a lot of people have, because it's such a touchy subject to touch, right? Because
Mm,
you want to get out there and you want to be supportive of, personally, I want to be supportive of everybody that is fighting against any power structure anywhere. That's what we need to be doing, right?
right.
We need to be getting ready. We need to learn how to do that, right? So, and I think that that's wonderful. But is it astroturf? Is it being led on? And that's the thing, right? Is a lot of the military-backed coups done by the United States or done by any other major superpower always involves a certain amount of people on the ground that are actually angry and that actually have real
Yeah.
concerns.
Yeah.
That's how they push those ideas as being legitimate.
Hmm.
With every lie, if you have a certain amount of truth in it, it makes it more real. So, and yeah, that is a really tough one to talk about, but it's telling that that's the one that we see everybody talking about, but we don't see the genocide that's happening in Yemen. We don't see any of the attacks that are happening throughout the rest of the entire world. We're only seeing these things that, well, for it benefits the United States to have that portrayed on their media. It's just the way it is.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. There's no doubt that the UK and the US are coming out way ahead in this battle, more so than even if the protesters come out ahead with their grievances. The US and the UK are still going to be the ones that really come out ahead. Um, but yeah. So, what are you planning on doing in the future? Your channel, it's growing. I see it. So, where are you headed?
Okay, so I started off my channel just trying to do everything as like relaxed and as easy as I possibly could, just trying to like get videos out there, sit down, record something, and go. And the way that I am, I make things a little bit more complicated and a little bit more complicated and a little bit more complicated until a point where now I just finished filming a special Halloween special that's basically like a full-on movie. It's like 23 minutes long. I went and shot all across the entire province. It was a lot of fun to do. Uh, but yeah, things get more complicated. So I'm just hoping that my little cell phone camera videos aren't going to get more complicated, because that's already hard enough as it is. I honestly don't know how you put out a video every day, man. Like it is difficult.
I
It is
don't I
difficult.
don't sleep. I mean, that helps. uh,
Yeah, you can't sleep. That's the thing, right? You got to be on it all the time, always researching, always knowing, right? That's the thing about doing online stuff too. I'll just say is that you have this expectation to be perpetually correct with everything that you say, and that you always have to have some sort of opinion on everything. And it's like sometimes I wake up and I'm like, man, I don't care. Sorry, I don't care. Like I wake up sometimes and I'm like, it's all effed. There's just the only way to fix things is through a full-on revolution. Why am I talking about like this petty grievance that's happening between a mayor and some other guy like 100 miles away? None of this matters, but it does matter because even though politics is very stupid, it is very important. And it's something that we unfortunately have to pay attention to, even though every single day feels like someone is opening up a full fire hose into your mouth of information that is just impossible to deal with.
Yeah, yeah, I can definitely feel you on that one too. Yeah, there have been a couple of times, especially right after the latest thing with Baghdadi. My inbox immediately filled up because that is my area. And like they're wanting like an immediate reaction to what's going on and what's going to happen, and I'm like, he's not even cold yet. Give me a minute, let me figure it out, let me talk to some people, find out what's going on. But there is that pressure to always be 100% correct. And you're extrapolating stuff from different sources and trying to come up with the best guess that you can. And actually, when I finally came down to that one, I'm like, any of these three things can happen. But because we don't have the information yet, we don't really know what happened. Um,
And that's like what I was saying just before we started the stream, right? Is that news crews, and what we're doing is kind of similar to like a news thing, right? It's commentary, but it is kind of news. And news crews have entire groups of people that deal with editing, they deal with sound, they deal with all of these sorts of things. They find you stories and that sort of thing. So it's so difficult for independent creators like you, like me, like Peter Coffin and other people to actually get out there and produce really well researched, really well thought out content on a regular basis without having that support behind us like they do, right? Like they Fox News or Blaze TV or whatever it is, they have millions of dollars behind them, and I'm just some sitting here in my in my office, like hoping that I'm getting things right, So
well, that's actually one of the directions we're taking the podcast now. Is we're going. I've noticed that we're getting the best solutions from the ground level. They've got millions of dollars of research and millions of dollars at their disposal, and every channel is the same. There should be some variation. Somebody should be coming up with something ahead rather than just regurgitating the same talking points.
totally agree. And the thing is too is it actually reminds me of the way that guerrilla forces operate when they're fighting against an overwhelming power, right? Like the United States military or any other kind of military. You have to not think in the same ways that somebody with unlimited money can think in, right?
Right.
You have to be light on your feet. The kid with the bolt action rifle on the top of the hill is going to be able to get an entire military base to expend millions of dollars worth of ammunition at them by just throwing it at them, just by shooting a couple of shots at them, right, with a
Mm-hmm.
bolt action rifle. That's the kind of way that we have to think about those sorts of things as guerrilla tactics. We have to be able to be light on our feet and running out there with our running shoes on, and not combat boots, and hopefully we'll be able to maneuver around it and actually get a good solid audience, which we're doing, I think.
All right. So, parting shot. You got anything you want to say to the audience?
You know what? Not a whole lot outside of that. I am a huge proponent of direct action. If I could ask anybody out there to do anything, it would be to not subscribe, not to donate, though those things definitely do help the production of the shows and stuff like that. But it is to actually get out in the street and make yourself physically shown. Putting physical bodies in physical spaces is the only way that we're going to actually see any sort of real reform, any sort of real change in the world. And if things are bothering you out there right now, if things are making it difficult for you to live and you have the time, right? A lot of us don't have the time, but if you do, get out there and actually try to make a difference, because it's up to all of us and we can't do it alone. So we have to have the support from everybody out there. So definitely do that. And if you do get a chance, check out my channel. It's ReEducation on YouTube. And we do a lot of really interesting stuff there. Some of it's pretty dramatic, some of it's lighthearted, and some of it's just me talking off the cuff and swearing for about 20 minutes. So.
All right. All right. Sounds good. So everybody, that's the conclusion of the interview portion. We'll be back shortly here in just a minute.